She's been premier, party leader, and now she wants to be mayor and run Johannesburg. Helen Zille has made headlines for decades, but today here on Level Up, we're turning the lens a little closer. Not at the sound bites, not at the outrage, but at the questions nobody seems willing to ask about power, ambition, her legacy, and her vision for the future of this great city. Helen, it's exciting to have a person as accomplished as you are in the political landscape. It is always exciting. And you've held nearly every major office in South African politics, from premier, MP, mayor, and full circle. Why this city and why now? Why come back as mayor now?
Well, now is the opportunity. When the opportunity arises, you take it. You can't schedule in life when your opportunities come, but when they do come, as they usually do, you can take them. And that answers the now question. The why here is because I love Joburg. I'm a Joburg girl. I was born here in Hillbrow, actually, in Estlin Street. I was raised here. I went to school here. I started my first jobs here. This is my place.
Is this a bigger DA strategy or is it just a personal mission?
It's both. It's a personal mission. The opportunity arose and I grabbed it. But in the DA we have processes. I can't say I will now be the mayoral candidate for Johannesburg. It doesn't work like that. We advertise for applicants. Anyone can apply as long as they decide to join the DA, because you do have to be a DA member to become the DA candidate, obviously. But anyone from outside can apply if they're committed to the challenge. And then we have to go through a very tough round of interviews and other things. And if we get through with the most points, then we'll be recommended. And if we're recommended by the selection panel, then the federal executive has to do the final vetting and say whether they think we're fit for purpose.
So when I ask if it's a bigger DA strategy, I'm wondering if this is a stop on the road to 2029.
Well, of course it's a stop on the road to 2029. Every election is a stop on the road to the next election. So if you look at the history of a political party, you take it from election to election to election and see which way the graph moves. Now, obviously, the graph doesn't always move in a linear direction, straight up. In politics, it's quite a bumpy ride. So sometimes you're going up and then sometimes you have a correction and then sometimes you go up and you have a little bit of a correction. But we hope our graph is now moving up. We had corrections in 2001. We had corrections in 2019. You have corrections. That's what happens in politics. But if you can consolidate around your principles, focus on the goal and move forward, you recover from those corrections. So we're a bit like the price of Bitcoin in politics, but the general trend is upwards and onwards, and every election is a stop to the next election.
Do you feel that there's a particular thing that only you are equipped to solve in Joburg?
No, you're never uniquely equipped to solve anything. I mean, the world is full of indispensable people, isn't it? I mean, the minute they've gone, then people replace them. So nobody's indispensable. And of course, I'm not the only person who could do the job, but the selection panel thought I was the best candidate out of the various people whose hats were in the ring. And I'm very honored by that. And I think my whole life has really prepared me for this job. I've managed coalitions before. I've grown a political party before. I've implemented policy before. I have turned around ANC governments before. So I turned around the ANC government in 2006 when I became the mayor of Cape Town. And then I did the same in 2009 when I became the premier of the Western Cape. So I do know how to turn around failing governments. And that is a big advantage when you come to this position.
And that is, and you talk about all of the achievements, and it's quite a legacy. And it's quite, and I think as a woman in politics, one of very few in South Africa who have been in all of these positions and afforded the opportunity to shift so much Is there ever a time in your view where personal ambition can begin to overshadow the nature of nurturing the next crop of leaders? Is it not time to pass the baton?
Well, the interesting thing is, and I know you won't believe me, but you don't have to, it doesn't really matter. You won't believe me that I'm not inherently an ambitious person. I want South Africa to work. And everything I've done in my whole life has been towards that goal. And I'll also say this. I must be the politician who's tried to pass the baton more than any other one, and not with great success. So I tried to pass the baton in 2015, 2019, 2014, even if you go back long enough. I've been trying to pass the baton for as long as I can remember. And in 2019, things had got so wobbly in the DA that I decided it was time to come back and try with other people to fix it. So that had nothing to do with personal ambition, absolutely nothing to do with personal ambition. I was looking forward to my retirement with my husband, but I was very worried that the DA would continue its downward trajectory at that time. And I knew that South Africa can't succeed unless the DA succeeds. So I mentioned to my husband that I thought I had to go back and try and help fix it. He thought I was crazy, but he knows not to stand in my way. If I've got a mission coming up, you can imagine. And he's been very supportive and helpful, absolutely. And none of these roles that I've subsequently played have been things that I've gone after because I'm ambitious. I've gone after because I really believe that there's a role I can fulfill in fixing things.
And what does that, in your view, what does that mean for not just the DA, but South Africa's political landscape when we have to, people such as yourself, have to repeatedly return to leadership roles because can't pass the baton? Is it a problem with young leadership not being groomed, not being ready, in your view, what does this mean for the future of the landscape?
Well, we have been running a young leaders program since 2006, the year I first became the mayor. So for 20 years, every single year, we ask for applicants from across South Africa to what we call our Young Leaders Program. We give them a full year's course in our political philosophy, in the history of South Africa, in the history of the party, in the core major philosophers who grounded our vision and our approach to solving political problems. They have a full year's course on that. They have to do a major project applying those ideas, and it's produced the most stunning people. What I have learned in terms of growing political leadership is that it's an organic process. You cannot parachute people into leadership roles and think they will succeed. I don't want to sound as if I'm indispensable at all, because no leader is indispensable. But these jobs are very, very difficult. People who just see you on television and hear you on a podcast think, well, I can do that. I can go and chat to a nice interviewer who's asking me warm and fuzzy questions. That is the tiny tip of the iceberg of this job. It is unspeakably pressured. Much of your pressure comes from within your own party. And then, of course, there's the extra volcanic pressure from outside your party. It's very difficult in the midst of all that turmoil to have a focus on your end goal and to persuade others to follow you to achieving it. These jobs are hellish. They are not full-time jobs. They are whole-time jobs. There's no knocking off at 5 and saying, I'm going to spend time with my family now. That doesn't exist. So if you've grown up in politics, like many of our young leaders are doing at the moment, for example, Siviwe Gwagube, our Minister of Education, was a young leader many years back. Solly Malatsi, our Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, was a young leader chosen for our program way back. They have climbed step by step by step, and they are now cabinet ministers, which I've never been. And that is through organic development. It's exactly like being a professor at a university. You can't say, okay, well, I think you're very smart and have the potential to be a professor, so I'll make you a professor. It doesn't work like that. You have to go through all the rungs of the ladder. You've got to first get your foundational degree. You've then got to get your postgraduate degree. Then you've got to get your master's and your doctorate and have a whole lot of publications. It's an organic development till you can be called an expert in your field. And in politics, it is even more so. It is tough, and you've got to learn to be unbelievably resilient. You've got to learn to come back from very hard knocks. You've got to learn to take them, and you've got to learn to fight back. And not all people have that within them automatically, but those skills can be learnt, and they are learnt, but organically through the process.
You talk about the resilience and the organic and working with many, many different people, which I think is a fantastic place to segue into talking about coalitions and coalition politics, right? You've often argued that smaller parties destabilize government and independence to an extent. How then, and if it is the future of South Africa as we see the voter base more and more diversifying, how then do you see keeping a coalition working in an environment like Joburg?
Well, the first point to make in answer to that question is that voters get the government they voted for. And if voters vote for a whole lot of tiny parties, they must understand that it'll need, as it did last time in Joburg, 9 parties to get above 50% in the council. Now, you have to have 50% in the council, 50% plus 1 actually, in order to pass budgets, in order to pass bylaws, in order to do property transactions, and in order to take any real decision with a majority in council. So you need 136 seats in Johannesburg, because Johannesburg has 270 seats overall. And getting 50% plus 1 is very, very difficult, especially in a proportional representation system such as we've got, and I don't have to go into the explanation of that now. But if you don't get 136 seats, you've got to partner with other parties and draw up a coalition agreement until you hit that magic number. That's why you need a coalition. And sometimes you need a lot of parties to make up that number. Now, the more parties you have, the more unstable and vulnerable the coalition is. Let me give you an example of the last election in Nelson Mandela Bay. In Nelson Mandela Bay, in the last election, we got 40% and the ANC got 39%. So we just beat the ANC by 1%. But in terms of the proportional representation system's calculation, we each got the same number of seats in the council, which was 48 seats each. And in that council, you needed 61 to get over the magic number, because they've got 120 seats in their council. So you needed 61 to get 50% plus 1. And to do that, to get from 40 seats to 51 seats, we needed 9 other parties. Now think of that. Most of those parties have only 1 seat in the whole council. So they couldn't even get 2,000 votes in the whole of Nelson Mandela Bay. They're there, and that single seat holds the balance of power. Now, what do I mean by the balance of power? It means that if you vote for the other side, you bring down the government. One individual, and there were 5 single individual parties there in that 9-party, 10-party coalition with us, if you include us. There were 5 parties with a single representative. That means 5 individuals, if they didn't like what we were doing, could vote for the ANC side and bring down our government. Now, often with these tiny parties, which are formed by people who have personal political ambitions and not really grounded in a political philosophy, it's about what's in it for them very often. I don't want to generalize, not with everybody, but very often, yes, it is. And it is impossible for the biggest party, which was the DA and our Mayor Retief Oudendal, it is impossible for them to take the bold moves they have to take in order to achieve what they need to achieve. Because if you are trying to fix a broken city, and anything you inherit from the ANC is broken, their one skill is breaking everything. And if you have to... 20 Rand.
20 Rand.
20 Rand, I get it. 20 Rand with pleasure and with interest. I'll better explain to the listeners what that's about. But let me get back to my argument and then I'll explain what the 20 Rand's about. So, the minute you are in a situation where you have to take a bold decision that someone doesn't like, one of your partner parties are going to go to speak to the officials and they will bring your government down.
Helen, are you saying that in our councils, we have people who do not have the best interest, even with their political ambitions, who do not have the best interests of the people that they represent, so much so that it is impossible to have a contestation and an understanding with them, party to party, that says this is for the best, for our city, for the people, to move us forward? Everybody?
I'm certainly not saying everybody, but very many. Very many. If you ask a large number of these tiny, small parties what they stand for and what the difference in philosophy is between different parties and what they seek to achieve, they may come out with a lot of generalizations, but you can't judge on that basis. You've got to judge on the basis of when the rubber hits the road. Will they take a decision that is going to advance the interests of that city? And there are many people who disagree on what's in the interests of that city. And that's why they're different political parties, of course, and that's why voters get to choose between them. But there are many political parties who don't even bother to read the text of the coalition agreement. For them, a coalition negotiation is only about who will get which position. So it's only about who will be the mayor, who will be the speaker, who will be the deputy mayor. Now, of course, it's very important to argue who will be the mayor and who will be the speaker because they shape very much of what happens. But for many of the smaller parties entering coalitions, the underlying principles, values, and coalition agreement is almost non-existent compared to the personal ambition for a position. And that is just true. It's just true.
And so then, in that environment, how then do you see your role in establishing and holding together a stable coalition without dismissing the smaller parties and their voices?
Well, the more votes the DA can get, the better, because then we don't have to have 9-party coalitions. In Cape Town, we had a 7-party coalition, which was big enough and difficult enough to manage. 9 parties, I can tell you, is impossible, because you can't keep 9 individuals with big egos and big goals happy all the time. And the other thing is that the ANC knows that they can make a better offer than you.
Again,
and people will
another 20 rand.
Let me just explain to the listeners what's going on here. Every time I mention the ANC, I have to pay a 20 Rand fine to go into the cup. But I cannot.
Every time we make them an argument of what it is that we.
But let me tell you why I have to mention this here. Let me tell you why I have to mention the ANC here. I'll willingly pay you 40 Rand or whatever it takes to be able to explain to the listeners coherently what is going on. So we put together this 10-party coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay. And everyone has a position because that's what they want. So we might be the biggest party by far with 40 seats, and the other parties have 1 seat each, except one of the parties has 2 seats, and the last one has 3 seats. So they all have a tiny amount of seats compared to the DA. But because all those other 9 people want positions, the DA has hardly any positions, right? Now, the ANC, that's 60 Rand I'm paying you, the ANC comes along and they say to somebody in your coalition, you're only a mayoral committee member for this portfolio, so we will make you the mayor if you come to us. And of course they say, sure. And they bring down your government because now they've got a chance of being the mayor. And then you get into the politics of bribery and extortion. It's got nothing to do with the interests of the people. This is now the politics of bribery and extortion. And that happens in all these coalitions. But that is the result of voter choice. That is the consequence of voter choice.
In a vibrant democracy, the choices that the voters make are what gets us to where we are.
Exactly.
And that for me also raises an issue that says, what is it that you believe you can turn around in Johannesburg right now that for people who may not see you, Helen, or the DA, as a viable choice? What is it that you can turn around at this time that you believe you are perfectly poised for?
Well, we're perfectly poised because we have a lot of experience in turning around governments. We have a lot of experience in managing coalitions, and we have a lot of experience in implementing our policies. And that makes us by far the best choice before you even begin to talk about the details. But the first thing we have to do is ring fence the finances for utilities. That means that the money that people pay for water must be used to fix the water. The money that people pay for electricity must be used to fix the electricity network, etc., which is not the case at the moment. It all goes to a general big pot and then gets basically used for the various looting channels. So we will ring fence the finances. We will stop corruption, as difficult as that is going to be, because corruption in Johannesburg is syndicated. It's not individuals, it's whole networks of corrupt people that you have to break. In fact, there's syndicated criminality in Johannesburg. And we will focus on ensuring that we have fit-for-purpose appointments in the right places to deliver water, to fix the electricity network, to fix everything to do with roads, to apply our bylaws, clean up public open spaces, and then make sure that we cut all of the red tape and rebuild our broken CBDs.
I love the fact that you talk about ring fencing the money and kind of getting away from the corruption, because it leads the money question. And another DA mayor years ago, Phumi Mashigo, came to Joburg.
Now you have to pay 20 rand.
But he's a DA mayor.
No,
he was a DA mayor at the
anymore.
time.
You have to pay at least 10 rand. Then.
DA mayor at the time came into Johannesburg with a promise, and one of the biggest problems at the time, and still remains a problem, was the billing of various people and how they were billed, and the billing crisis. So the income that the city was able to bring in, it's still a problem. And the problem has been exacerbated by, we know, the numbers of unemployment and indigent households and all of that. How do you envisage, without criminalizing poverty, finding a way around getting the city's finances, income, back to where it could be?
Well, I will never criminalize poverty. No one chooses to be poor, in my book. I've always been puzzled about the billing system in Johannesburg because I kept asking the question, why isn't there an integrated billing system? Why isn't it on the SAP system, which the city spend many, many, many hundreds of millions installing? Cape Town's works perfectly. And I'm told that key people do not want a billing system. Why? Because that prevents corruption. And if you systematize it, and if you have proper software, and if you have the right checks and balances and the right password-protected access, you prevent corruption. And there are lots of people who don't want to prevent corruption. There are lots of people who have a vested interest in maintaining corruption and increasing the prospects for corruption. And that's the core problem.
And for those people who see you on the campaign trail and perhaps are asking themselves, what did you just say? Why is Helen back here and trying to be my mayor. And maybe people who also feel over the years unheard or unseen by some DA candidates over the years and councillors, because we have a very a plural society here in Johannesburg, multicultural, completely diverse in many, many ways. What would you say is your idea around ensuring that they too see you as their mayor?
Well, the important thing is that they mustn't only see me. The DA is the most diverse party in South Africa. It is the only party that reflects the diversity of which you speak, which is one of South Africa's great strengths. And it's also the DA's great strength, that we have this incredible diversity inside our party. So please don't only see me. I'm just the tip of an iceberg. There are huge numbers of people in my campaign team and in our party as a whole, and will be in our government, that reflects the full diversity of South Africa. And I'm not asking anyone to particularly like me at all. Lots of people don't like me, of course. And that's fine, that's their right. You don't even have to like the DA. You just have to love Johannesburg, to put a party in office that has a track record of fixing things and getting things done, and a party that really reflects the full diversity of South Africa.
So I've also seen in places where you're saying that history will vindicate you and the legacy that you've created for yourself. Do you see this campaign as part of cementing that legacy?
Well, no, I really don't know what's going to come, whether I am going to achieve the goal of trying to get into a position where I can help fix Joburg, or whether I'm not. I just have to do what I have to do in the moment, and I have to take decisions that I believe will have been right when I look back in 10 years' time. So I do things because they're worth doing, not because they serve my personal interests. And frankly, I don't think of legacy. If you do your best where you are with what you have, your legacy looks after itself.
How do you think that history is going to see and remember your repeated returns to positions of power?
Well, it depends who writes that history, doesn't it? I mean, I think people must just judge by the consequences. Was my role constructive or was it not? Did I help fix things or did I not? And to use objective measures to answer that question. So, frankly, I really try and understand what the underlying problem is. I try to look at various solutions. I try to look at the evidence of the efficacy of those solutions. Then I apply them. And I think I do that with courage, not taking into account what people will think of me personally. I try to do the right thing.
So at the end of 2026, after the votes are counted and you have a minority but large party in the Joburg City Council, how do you envisage the way forward from there?
Well, you have to see how the voters voted. You have to see what it's going to take to get over 50%. Obviously, we're in it to win it. You know, you don't fight an election and talk about losing. You fight an election with your eye on the prize of winning, and your strategy is designed to achieve that, absolutely. But if you fall below 50%, then you've got to look at your options for coalitions. And there are always various options. There's never only one option. And all the other parties are also looking for options for coalitions. So it's very difficult to say beforehand, before you know the outcome of the votes, which option would be the best. All I can say is we'll look at all the options and we'll take the least bad for Johannesburg. The best is obviously for the DA to win outright, because then we can implement policies without constantly worrying about the government falling. We can implement solutions without our partner parties being bribed and extorted to go to the other side. And that makes an enormous difference, because you can govern. And the bigger we are, the more we can govern properly and get the results we need. But if the voters decide not to give that to us, then we'll do the very best we can with what the voters give us.
So at national level, you are in a grand coalition, you've called it. Do you think that the national coalition will have an impact in how Johannesburg plays out? Is there lessons you can take from the national coalition to bring into the council?
Yes, there's no doubt that the national coalition will have a major impact on how we form governments at the local level, no question. What I've learned from the national coalition are several very hard lessons, that you can write any agreement that you want to and put the best strategies and mechanisms in place, but they can just as easily be ignored by your partners as if they don't exist. And that's a big lesson we learn in South Africa's context. When I went to Germany to study coalitions, which I have done now twice, what you learn from those coalitions primarily is that there are absolutely no similarities between what happens in Germany and what happens here. In South Africa, we have 2 weeks in terms of our constitution after the election to form a coalition government, just 2 weeks. Now, there's not much you can negotiate in 2 weeks. And even though we have coalition agreements in draft form drawn up before the time, to try and get things ready in 2 weeks is almost impossible. The Germans often take 6 months to do it. And then they dot every I and they cross every T. And then that document is like the Holy Grail. No one dares deviate from it. And if you do deviate from it, the voters will teach you a lesson in the next election. They hold you to account and they won't vote for you. In South Africa, that's not the case at all. You sign the agreement and then promptly ignore it. Not our party. I'm not going to mention which party because I don't want to get bankrupt sitting here. But frankly, they just ignore it as if it does not exist. And then you have to choose. Do you have to bring down the government for that and have the ghastly consequences for South Africa? Or do you try and make the best of it? And these are very difficult choices because the voters won't hold the ruling party to account for simply violating the coalition agreement.
Talking about voters punishing parties at the ballot, in your view and with your polling and all of the research that you've been doing over the years, what do you think it is that has shifted the South African voter from big parties to more and more smaller parties, independents, a loss of trust, even in the DA?
Phumi, it's the voting system. We have a proportional representation system. It's not a constituency-based winner-take-all system. Now, in a proportional representation system, it's very tempting for lots of people to start their own parties because they don't have to win in many places to get into government. They just have to, across the board in that sphere of government, get enough votes to get just one seat. And so if you stand as an independent or if you stand and start your own tiny party, you ask everyone to vote for you, and if just a few people vote for you in every ward, just literally a handful, you can get a seat in that sphere of government. And that is a proportional representation system without thresholds. And we have a proportional representation system without thresholds, which actually don't work anywhere else in the world. In the other places in the world that have proportional representation systems, they have thresholds, which means that, for example, in Germany, if your party can't get 5% of the vote, you don't get any representation in that sphere of government. You have to show that you're a serious contender and have a serious level of support to be able to get any seats at all. In our system, that's not the case. So you can get a party that gets 0.2% of the vote and gets 1 or 2 seats even in that sphere of government and then have enough muscle power to demand to be the mayor. That's what happened in Johannesburg in 2021. the Al Jamal party had very, very small number of votes. They couldn't even get to 1% of the vote. And they've had two mayors, Kwamanda and Ahmad. They had two mayors because they could choose which side they wanted to put into government, our side or the other side. And that's the power that they used. And that comes as a consequence of not having thresholds. In any proportional representation system with thresholds, that party would not have got any seats at all because they wouldn't have made the threshold. In our system without thresholds, they get 2 seats or 3 seats, and 3 seats out of a 270-seat council, remember, 3 seats out of 270 seats in the council, and they can then decide who the mayor is going to be, and they can even decide that they're going to be the mayor because that's the price they're going to demand. So that's the politics of extortion.
Just listening to you, I'm asking myself, and I'm reminded of a George Bush quote about how we judge the intentions of others, that we judge the intentions of our own by our best intention and the other by their worst traits. And I'm asking myself if you believe that there are very many people who get into politics, whether as an independent or in a smaller party, for self-interest and are intractable with a interest in the betterment of South Africa or their council or their ward or their Johannesburg.
Well, there's 2 answers to that question. Some people are only blatantly self-interested, and we see who they are. Others can believe they have the interests of the city and the country at heart, but you never judge people by their intentions. You judge them by the outcomes of their policies. So I'm sure the ANC thought that their intentions were good, and I'm sure they thought that...
I'm at 100 Rand. I'm so happy.
That's fine. I'm sure the ANC thought that their intentions were good and that their policies would serve South Africa. But now we have a 60% youth unemployment, and we have over 30% general unemployment in South Africa, well over 30%. Now, when you look back, you say your intentions were good, but we don't look at intentions, we look at outcomes. In Cape Town, the unemployment rate is more than 10 percentage points lower than the rest of the country. In Midvaal, just down the road here, which is the only local authority governed by the DA in Gauteng, unemployment is in single figures. So don't look at what people say they're going to do, and don't judge them by their professed intentions. Judge them by their outcomes. If you see what the outcome is, then you work according to that. And there's an old saying, which is completely wrong in politics, that people never vote against their own interests. They do that all the time. They vote for parties and policies that are actually going to destroy this country. And that's why we have to stand up and explain that. And that is why we have to win where we can. And that is why we have to govern better, to give the demonstration effect of what it means to improve people's lives. It doesn't happen instantly. It happens gradually, but you can either advance gradually or go backwards gradually. And we prefer to advance gradually. And I think by now the demonstration effect is clear enough as to which party ensures progress and job opportunities for the poor and which parties don't. And many people would not draw that conclusion automatically. They must just look at the results.
I think that's a good place to end. Thank you for your time and good luck. Good luck with the steep road ahead of connecting that message with the hearts of the voters. You know, as you say, they vote against their own best interest, and there must be a disconnect somewhere. So good luck in connecting, in finding the golden thread that connects your message.
Thank you very much
to the
Phumi.
ballot and the voters.
I've got a great team, and there's never one individual that makes it happen. There's always a lot of individuals. I've got a particular role in that team, but I could not do it without the rest of them. And if you look at them, they are South Africa.
Wonderful. Thank you.